Okay, perfect. So I think we are ready to start. Welcome to HackHERHealth. Today is our third webinar session. In case if you missed the last two, yesterday was the first one with neurodiversity, about our challenge about neurodiversity, and the team formation session. And okay, some more people are joining. In any case, if you have missed any of those sessions, we will record all of them and make them available online on the Event Tornado platform. So feel free to rewatch or also send to your team colleagues which were unable to join this session. And in today's session, we are covering the fourth challenge of our hackathon, which is about intimate partner violence. And for this, I have the honor to present to you Inês Trindade, if I pronounce this correctly. She's a behavioral intervention scientist specialized in the application of third wave cognitive and behavioral therapy, which includes mindfulness and compassion-based therapy. She's currently working as an associate senior lecturer in psychology in Örebro University. She's the research lead of the Embrace Lab, and she has published over 70 scientific papers in international journals in the topic of psychology and has won several scientific awards, including the 2021 Outstanding New Investigator Award. And today, Inês will tell us more about the fourth challenge, which is intimate partner violence. And with this, I want to hand over to you, Inês. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin, for the nice presentation and also for this invitation of being a mentor in this great initiative that I very much admire. So today we're going to focus on challenge number 4. I hope you can see my screen. Yeah.
1 second.
No.
Not yet.
Not yet. All right. Now.
Yes, now.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. So first we have to actually start with what is IPV? What is intimate partner violence, right? Maybe it's quite an obvious question, but it's very important to go into that first. It can be defined as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or mental harm or suffering to women. In this case, we're considering IPV to women, right? And this includes threats, coercion, or other acts of control. And when it is perpetrated by an intimate partner or ex-partner, all right? So this is when we are talking about IPV. As I mentioned before, it can take in many forms, physical, sexual, emotional, financial, and controlling behaviors as well. The financial one is not as obvious, but it is very pervasive as well. And it happens when someone deprives another person of their bank account, for example, or having access to their resources or assets, etc. The other ones are quite obvious, maybe, in trying to understand them. The emotional one includes, for example, verbal abuse, insults, manipulation, etc. And it can happen in two major types of occurrence, okay? Situational, which happens when only one incident has happened in the past, and this is normally bidirectional, and it's not as it's still very serious, but it's not as concerning as the chronic or continuous one. All right, it's this one that we psychologists and healthcare professionals are most concerned about, because in this one, the victim is way more likely of being harmed, and the victim shows signs of fearing the partner, for example, and this can end up in death or other serious harm. What about the numbers that we know right now about IPV in the world? So about 1/3 of women aged from 15 to 49 years old who have been in an intimate relationship report that they have suffered from IPV. This is quite a large number, unfortunately, and one may think that in Sweden, because Sweden is such an equal country and such developed country socially, etc., these numbers are not as high, but actually they are. They are even higher than we would expect, or what the average in Europe is. So in the Nordic countries, we have the highest rates of IPV in the EU. These are some numbers from this paper here that you can read. Maybe that could be useful because it's really applied and done in the Swedish context. In this survey, for example, it's old but still important. It was reported that 35% of the female respondents had suffered from IPV. And then other studies show 25% or 26%, but a more recent study showed that the Nordic countries, again, are the highest of the 28 EU countries in terms of rates of IPV. And Sweden, for example, has 28% here in this study, where the average of the EU is 22%. And in this paper, you can also find themes that were associated with the perception of people in general about IPV. And what they found is that a lot of people tend to look at violence as in terms that it only happens in foreign or immigration contexts, right? That it's more done by foreign men than Swedish men, or assumptions about norms and the dynamics of masculinity, femininity, etc. But what we know is that IPV exists in all social strata of society, including in Swedish society, all right? And having these sorts of stereotypes and attitudes towards IPV is associated with a lack of response to IPV. And we're going to look at it a bit more. But the truth is that this Nordic paradox remains unresolved. And that is a major concern for society and for women in general, and for human beings in general, because IPV can cause a serious short-term and also long-term physical, mental, sexual problems for women. And it can also affect their children, of course. And so IPV leads to high social and economic costs for women, their families, and societies in general. More specifically, IPV can have fatal outcomes. It can lead to injuries, where we can find that 42% of women who have experienced IPV reported an injury as a consequence of this violence. That's a very large number of women. And it can also lead to unintended pregnancies, induced abortions, gynecological problems, and also STDs. It can also be associated with miscarriage, stillbirth, and other problems related to delivery. And of course, it can lead to depression, PTSD, and other anxiety disorders, and other psychological disorders as well, which are very serious and hard to treat sometimes. And it can also be associated with physical disorders like gastrointestinal disorders, like IBS, for example, and chronic pain, etc. And going back a little bit when we were talking about the attitudes of people in general towards IPV, they encompass some of the challenges that we as a society face regarding this problem, right? And one of them relates to victim blaming attitudes that I covered a bit before starting talking about the impact, for example, right? When I was giving an example of people associating IPV to very specific contexts and not remembering or not taking into consideration that this problem happens in all socioeconomic levels, right? And this is yet another challenge that we face, which is blaming the victim for the abuse and violence that they face. Okay, and this is a big problem also because it can lead to women and also witnesses to not want to testify, for example, right? So we can only have a reduction of IPV in our society if we address these social perceptions, all right, that have led to attitudes and justifications for the violence that these women face. Because indeed, the women are not to blame in any way. I think this is an obvious thing to say, but still we should say it because there's complex psychological mechanisms associated with this process and with being a victim of IPV, especially if it's a chronic situation. So it's a very frequent and continuous situation. And one of the mechanisms that I chose to talk about today is learned helplessness. Maybe you haven't heard about this process, but this is a very powerful psychological process that basically means that when we are repeated to, when we are exposed several times to certain situations, normally negative ones, that can result in the development of negative perceptions and beliefs about our own ability to get out of those situations or to deal with that situation, right? So this means that when we are exposed to this sort of abuse that is continuous and serious, we can develop this process called learned helplessness, right? We can start to believe, very strongly believe, that we cannot do anything about it. So we have learned to be helpless. And this is something that we cannot blame anyone of, because this is something that happens in our brain and this is a human response. All right. And this explains why a lot of women in these situations don't even seek for help, right? And for example, this song from the 80s from Suzanne Vega, that maybe you know, Luca, is a good example of this process from a child's point of view. So it's in the context of children's abuse, but it's the same process. The child feels that he cannot do anything about it. It's not even worth to talk about it, for example. So if you're interested, just take a listen to this song to try to understand better what this learned helplessness process is about. And other challenges that we face in this IPV context are the ones that have been identified in this event, right? That you can find here and also in the flyers about the challenge. And one of them is the lack of training of healthcare professionals, right, and other members of social work, for example, social workers or lawyers or other agents associated or indirect contact with these women. They are not trained to identify and also address signs of violence. Another challenge is that the healthcare institutions and other support services are not well associated with each other. They don't effectively address these problems together. And so this is another challenge that maybe we could do something about, a better communication between healthcare institutions that maybe can identify these problems and then support services that can support these women. And then the last one, the need for more effective law enforcement, right? And enhanced protection of these women and their children. All right, we don't have enough means or contexts to actually do something legally about IPV. And maybe we can do something about it because we know all of this, we know about all the data that I just presented, and there's way more amounts of data that one could search and read. There's a lot of data indeed, but these challenges remain unaddressed. And that's why this event created this challenge, right? So we can try maybe to create opportunities or solutions to respond effectively to these challenges, or one of them, right? About screening, all right, and training of healthcare and other types of staff like social workers, for example, etc. Improving resource constraints on support services and the communication between healthcare and the support services, and also improve how we support women, how we can support women to complete cases against their abusers, right? In terms of the Swedish law, for example. And I believe that together we may be able to take a few steps towards finding solutions to help women living right now and in the future with IPV. And this is from your manual as well, or flyer regarding the challenge itself. It's just a summary of this slide. And that's it for me right now. So I was wondering if you have any questions for me.
Thank you very much, Inês. This was super, super nice. I actually know the song that you were referring to. I never realized that this was something about learned helplessness. I was aware of the term, but I never really listened to the lyrics that much, but I need to re-listen later. So now I pass on the stage to all you participants to ask questions if you have any to Inês. I see, Bryony, you were having a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask directly?
Yeah, I can do, yeah. So thank you very much for the talk, Inês. That was really interesting. And I just wanted to ask you about this paradox in the Nordic countries around IPV and why we see those higher rates of reporting. And I had a theory, is this due to the ability of being able to speak up as it's a better environment and better reporting rates and perhaps people being believed, and then also better prosecution in the law compared to somewhere like the UK, for example? I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Thanks for the nice question. It's an important question indeed. I think there are several different types of answers to that question. The first, maybe, I'm not Swedish, so I'm Portuguese, so I'm a bit of an outsider here in this way. But from my perception and what I've read as well is the Swedish legal system can be quite lenient, right, with people committing crimes, where we can include IPV, right? So that may be one issue, but again, this is not really my field, law or legal practice. And then your other question about why we face such high prevalence of IPV in Sweden. I think many factors can be associated with this data. Culture is probably one, right? But honestly, we're not sure. We're not sure why. In general, people here in the north of Europe can be a bit more avoidant than people from the south of Europe, for example, and talk about problems a bit less openly. That could be maybe why it's not flagged from the beginning, or friends don't really grasp that situation from the beginning or try to help from the beginning. We're not sure. Sorry to not be able to provide a better answer.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Then there's another question from Mitra. For anyone else who has questions, please just raise your hand and then we will unmute you to give you the stage to ask the question. Mitra, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. The statistics is very high for how many women are in this situation, but what is the dark number here? Like, how do we know? If you have found all the different, I mean, these women, they're probably more than what the statistics shows. Like, where does your data come from? And especially about that you brought up one of the syndromes, or that the helplessness, feeling learned helplessness, that you cannot do anything about it and you will not ask for help. So how do you find these people when you cannot reach for help? Like, what is the statistics there? Like, how many are in the dark number?
Yeah.
Like in alcohol abuse, like there are so many being drunk every day in Sweden, but we don't see them on the streets, right? They're in the homes with their kids, and similar thing with abuse and violence. We don't see them on the streets.
Yeah, exactly. It's hidden.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I understand the question. Yeah. I would say a lot more are in the dark or hidden, right, than we know of. And that's why screening is so important. And it can be done in a routine consultation with a doctor or a nurse, for example, when these women go to a routine healthcare appointment. A few questions done by a trained professional maybe can do all the difference. That's one of the possible ways, because we have access to women in general, right, like that. And all women eventually go to this sort of appointment, right, for routine or any other health problem that they may be facing. So that's quite a normal, usual thing to do. So it could be a way of assessing for this, but it would have to be done by a trained professional. So that's why it's so important also not just to screen, but also train professionals to be aware and be able to identify and also address compassionately, right, this problem with these women.
And I also am thinking about that women can also feel like they want to protect their partner from being, found out. So do you have any like research about that, like any numbers on that, or like how often, how common is that?
It's quite common, right? And if you do a quick search on Google Scholar, for example, you will find information on this. It's quite common, and it's also associated with this complex psychosocial processes associated with being a victim, right? Especially if you've been a victim for years or decades. And it's associated with the idea that you get that you cannot do anything about it. And then you can also start to justify the behavior in your own mind.
I have a third question, or fourth. Do you know if there are any like safety nets for these women, like if they actually are brave and like tell what they're in, what's happening, and be asking for help? Do you know if they get help in Sweden, and what type of help they get for, not going to psychology, I mean, to talk about it, but really because it's a trauma in your body. How can you help them to regulate their nervous system and, to get back into a normal, as good as possible? How can you, is that something we have support for in our society, like in the healthcare? Have you seen that? Is there any info about that?
Unfortunately, not that much, because that should be done by a psychologist, right? It should be done with therapy, and we have a lot of therapy approaches that are well designed and also tested for this sort of problem. But we don't have enough psychologists in Sweden, so the healthcare cannot respond to all the needs in any dimension of mental health.
Okay.
Where we can include women with PTSD or depression, anxiety, etc., associated with abuse. Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay, and final, during the hackathon, will there be any expert or like someone to talk about this topic with during the, like, to have an expert in this field? Will there be anyone physically in place in Gothenburg if you want to attend it?
I will be on Saturday.
Okay.
I don't know about the other mentors.
Yeah, we have a whole set of different mentors, which skill set you will see. I think we will send out more information about all the mentors that will be present either remotely or in person. I'm not 100% sure about the specific niche that you're searching for, but we can double check and let you know.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Perfect. Then there's one more question also in the chat, which is, are there any studies related to perpetrator psyche? I'm not so familiar with this word. Maybe Setu, if you want to elaborate, or maybe Inês, you know what she mentioned. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of studies on aggressors and their personality and how they deal with anger, for example. And there's also a lot of interventions focused on promoting a better regulation of anger, for example, in aggressors. So yeah, there's a lot of literature and studies about it, but I think this challenge focuses more on the victim. So it's more victim-centered and trying to find solutions for the victim herself. I don't know if I answered.
Cool, then there's
you.
Another hand. Aya, you have your hand raised. Do you want to take your question?
Hello. Yes. I'm wondering if there are any preventive measures taken in Sweden. So actually, maybe some sort of education or on how to recognize this behavior for women, to make sure you do something before they become a victim?
I think there are, and here in Örebro, for example, where I teach, we have introduced this topic into certain courses, like the one I teach, because we consider it as a public health problem, right? So it's important that psychology students, in this case, are well educated on it. And I think, yes, indeed, there are programs in Sweden that try to focus on this, but not to an extent that may reach older women, for example, or women in their 30s, 40s, 50s. And that's also a challenge to try to change society's perception on IPV and also potential victims about what they can do before it starts to get ugly.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Of course.
Perfect. Also, in the interest of time, we are already over. So if there are any questions, you can also, as Inês mentioned, she will be on site on Saturday and also present remotely on Sunday. So if you have more questions about this topic, feel free to also reach out to her. And with this, I want to thank Inês again for the presentation and also for helping out with this challenge. And for all of you, I hope to see you then on Saturday or for the kickoff, and then Saturday and Sunday. And hopefully we find very good solutions to this very challenging challenge. And thank you everyone for joining, and looking forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.